Welcome if you're here. It likely means you felt something wasn't quite right but couldn't put your finger on it. Perhaps you've loved deeply only to find yourself confused, emptied, or quietly replaced, and maybe like so many men raised to believe in the redemptive purity of romantic love, you've wondered how something so beautiful could leave you feeling so invisible. From the time boys are small, they are taught to wait for love as if it were salvation, as though one day a woman would arrive like grace itself, healing every hidden fracture in their soul. But what if that promise was never meant to be kept? What if the truth about some women, how they love, why they connect when they leave, has been in plain sight all along? Only no one wanted to see, not because the truth is too hard to understand, but it's too hard to let go of the illusion. Today we're going to uncover some truths that many men quietly suspect, but rarely name out loud, not to blame, not to shame, but to understand, because love as you've been taught to seek it may not always be love as it is truly lived. Stay with me until the end of this video. What you'll hear may challenge what you've believed, but it may also liberate you from expectations that were never yours to carry in the first place. Let's begin. Number 1. Love isn't redemption. It's a strategy in the silent corridors of her affection. Love is rarely a surrender. It unfolds more often as an arrangement, delicate, deliberate, and emotionally efficient. While many men arrive at love as if entering a cathedral, reverent in seeking salvation, countless women approach it as one approaches a chessboard with awareness, calculation, and intent shaped by experience. This distinction is not a judgment of character, but a reflection of deeply wired psychological priorities. For men, love frequently represents a path to wholeness, to rediscover something lost or affirm something doubted. It is an act of emotional purity, driven by impulse and anchored in vulnerability. For women, however, love tends to function less as a rescue and more as a reinforcer, a way to secure emotional equilibrium, reinforce social standing, or assert gentle control over uncertainty. What men often misread as innocence may be the visible surface of a much older instinct to choose not merely who inspires passion, but who strengthens position. Her affection is real, but its expression passes through filters sharpened by time, by disappointment, and by a long-standing awareness that love, while beautiful, is also one of the few tools available to shift power without confrontation. A man sees her tears and assumes fragility, not realizing those tears may serve as both expression and signal. Behind that emotion is sometimes a quiet strategic awareness of how that moment will shape his decisions, soften his resistance, or deepen his attachment. This isn't manipulation in its cruelest form. Rather, it is the human strategy of those who have learned that feelings alone rarely offer security. Women more attuned to social dynamics and long-term emotional outcomes often select not merely with the heart, but with an eye toward emotional sustainability. A man who listens closely would notice that the women who stay, who invest, who nurture, almost always do so with unspoken conditions. Those conditions are not voiced in ultimatums, but embedded in expectations, consistency, presence, validation, and strength. The ones who fail to meet them often find themselves drifting without warning, wondering how the warmth turned distant. He believes love should redeem. She knows love must also be reinforced. That subtle divergence is why many men confuse emotional sincerity with emotional dependence, not understanding that affection doesn't always imply devotion, and kindness doesn't necessarily mean permanence. A woman may love sincerely, but she rarely loves blindly. She observes how a man responds under pressure, how he handles neglect, how he restores dignity after a fall. These are her metrics, invisible perhaps, but never absent. And when he mistakes her politeness for affection or assumes her warmth means attachment, he may not recognize that he is projecting his emotional lens onto a different internal language. This is not to suggest that women are incapable of deep, sacrificial love. On the contrary, when they do give it freely, it is often a rare act of profound trust. But such vulnerability is earned, not assumed. In many cases, love is a phase in a larger architecture of emotional survival. She is not cruel, she is cautious, and in being cautious, she becomes powerful. What she desires ultimately is alignment, someone who reads not just her words but her silence, who sees not only her beauty but her blueprint. Those who meet her at that level of clarity, are not merely loved, they are chosen. Number 2, feminine roles, tools of influence in the emotional economy of male-female dynamics. What often appears as passivity in women is at times a deliberate form of direction. Femininity, its softness, its quiet sighs, its carefully timed glances can be a language as strategic as it is expressive. This is not to say that emotions are faked or feelings are counterfeit. Rather, what's at play is a kind of social fluency women often develop through years of being observed and responded to based on their emotional display. Cultural expectations have long taught women that assertiveness may provoke resistance, while vulnerability opens doors over time. Many come to understand this instinctively. It is rarely the raised voice or the direct command that shifts the behavior of a man. More often, it's the pregnant pause after a subtle comment like, "I just don't feel like I matter to you lately," that moves. No instructions were given, no confrontation took place. Yet something within him feels compelled to act, to repair, to reassure, to prove once again that he is the kind of man who protects, not wounds. This is not manipulation in the crude sense of deceit, but rather a lived understanding of how emotional cues govern male behavior when logic might fall short in these moments. What matters is not the literal meaning of the words, but their emotional resonance. A woman who grows quiet during dinner, who places her phone face down with a sigh, who lets a moment of stillness linger, just long enough she is not withdrawing. She is communicating. Her power does not erupt. It unfolds. This interplay taps into something foundational in the male psyche, the desire to do what is right, to be seen as a provider of emotional safety. The very traits that make men loyal and committed also render them susceptible to emotional redirection, especially when it is framed as softness instead of confrontation. A man may not even realize that a change in his behavior stems from her emotional cues until much later. The relationship shifts, but the steering wheel never appears in her hands. Understanding this dynamic is not an invitation to suspicion. It is a call for clarity, for recognizing the invisible ways relationships are shaped not only by words and actions, but by the emotional grammar beneath them. Women do not need to raise their voices to be heard. They only need to pause at the right time, and everything changes in relationships. The performance of emotion is not always about catharsis. Sometimes it is a form of direction, so gentle it feels like water, impossible to resist, impossible to grasp. Number 3. The man who volunteers his identity to keep her around. There is a moment often too quiet to detect when a man begins to dissolve within a relationship, not all at once, but an increment so subtle they feel like love. It begins with a compromise that seems reasonable, a shift in tone, a softened edge, a silence in place of a truth. He once would have voiced gradually. The center of his identity rearranges itself around the gravitational pull of a woman he fears losing. At first, the dynamic appears gentle. She doesn't ask for change directly. There are no ultimatums, no accusations. Instead, there are carefully timed comparisons, light-hearted comments cloaked as observations, a story about a man who listens better, a compliment about a friend's ambition, a remark about growth, about evolving needs, about how things have changed. The message is never said plainly, but its presence fills the spaces between her words. He starts to shape himself into the version he believes will be enough, thinner, more attentive, less confrontational, more agreeable. This is not a transformation from desire, it is an adaptation from fear. In his mind, he's being thoughtful. He imagines this flexibility as maturity, his willingness to bend as a strength, but each small edit to his personality is a quiet subtraction. A man's essence is not lost in grand gestures, but in repeated silences where he once had boundaries. When she senses this, often unconsciously, the power balance shifts. He becomes emotionally tethered to her approval. She becomes the mirror through which he views his worth. What makes this pattern so difficult to detect is the absence of malice. She may not intend to control him. Often, she too is responding to insecurities, measuring her partner against visions she has internalized, images crafted by culture friends, past lovers. Her expressions of discontent are rarely cruel, but they are consistent, and consistency becomes conditioning. Over time, the man stops acting from his internal compass. Decisions are weighed not by their alignment with his values, but by their potential to preserve the connection. His instincts are second-guessed. His preferences, if they threaten tension, are left unspoken. He is no longer in the relationship as a whole person, but as a version crafted, edited, and approved. The irony is that this erosion done to secure love often leads to its collapse. Attraction does not thrive in emotional submission. When a man becomes indistinct, when his edges are smooth beyond recognition, what remains is not compelling to a partner, seeking someone to meet, not mimic her. In trying to prevent distance, he creates disinterest. What was once affection turns into ambivalence. His sacrifices go unnoticed because they weren't requested, and what is offered without invitation is rarely valued. From the outside, others might see the change in him. Friends notice he laughs less freely. His ambitions begin to dim. His voice has softened in tone, but not in peace. He no longer speaks of the things that used to animate him, and yet he insists everything is fine. Those relationships require compromise. That is growth, but it is not growth, it is abandonment. The lesson hidden within this quiet tragedy is not that love requires stasis or resistance to influence growth within a relationship, is beautiful when it aligns with a person's deeper truths, but when a man begins to offer parts of himself as proof of loyalty, when his selfhood becomes a negotiation to preserve attachment, he has stepped onto a path not of partnership, but of dependency. A healthy connection should make both people more themselves, not less. When a man protects his center, his thoughts, his passions, his values, he offers something far more valuable than blind compliance. He offers clarity, and clarity, when combined with love, invites respect. What keeps a woman connected over time is not a man who reshapes himself at every emotional gust, but one who listens, reflects, and remains distinctly himself. The quiet strength of being emotionally present but internally anchored is the kind of stability that fosters lasting intimacy, not controlled, not adaptation, but mutual evolution. Number 4, she didn't betray you. She stopped performing. When a woman begins to pull away, to retreat into silence or coldness, the impulse is often to interpret this shift as a betrayal. Yet beneath that impulse lies a misunderstanding that men are rarely taught to examine. What truly unfolds is not a rupture, but a revelation. The woman has not changed, not in essence, but in expression. What fades is the performance, the delicate, attentive, and often exaggerated display of affection that once captivated the man's sense of self-worth. In the early stages, her warmth feels genuine, even eternal. She mirrors his strengths, celebrates his ambition, and amplifies his presence. But over time, if her emotional needs go unmet, or her strategic motives no longer align with the relationship, that performance begins to unravel. The change is rarely abrupt. It begins with less eye contact, a slower reply to messages, and an increase in silence between shared thoughts. What men interpret as rejection is often her withdrawal from a role that no longer rewards her emotionally or psychologically. The deeper tragedy is not that she leaves or grows indifferent, but that many men never truly saw her. They fell in love with the version of her that affirmed their identity, her gaze, her words, her attention. These became reflections of who he believed himself to be, and when that mirror shatters, the pain is not merely the loss of her affection, but the collapse of that internal image. It is the sense of self once amplified through her admiration now echoing into emptiness. This is why so many feel deceived. The affection once felt so vibrant now seems manufactured in retrospect. But the truth is subtler and less dramatic. She did not lie. She adapted, she coped, she tried, and eventually she stopped. Not out of cruelty, but because what she once sought, connection, affirmation, security, no longer emerge from the bond men are taught to seek, devotion as validation. When that devotion fades, they mistake it for treachery. But she was never a symbol. She was a person, one with her own evolving needs, fears, and silent compromises. She didn't betray him. He simply never learned to see her clearly beyond what she reflected to him. Understanding this requires letting go, not just of her, but of the illusion she once sustained. Only then can the pain begin to dissolve, because the wound is not made by her absence, but by the quiet realization that the connection was never as mutual as it seemed. Number 5, the truth is hidden in instinct, not malice. There is a quiet form of power that often goes unnoticed by the untrained eye, subtle, instinctive, and deeply woven into the fabric of female psychology. It is not cruelty that drives this power, nor is it calculated manipulation. Rather, it is the echo of centuries lived under the weight of imposed restraint, a legacy of adaptation in a world where confrontation has rarely favored women. The behavior may appear elusive or even unfair to those who expect clarity in every exchange, yet what manifests as softness or emotional ambiguity is not deception, it is survival in its most graceful form. Generations of women have internalized the need to express displeasure without raising their voices, to influence outcomes without issuing commands, and to navigate conflict through nuance rather than force. In this silence, they have cultivated an intelligence that does not confront directly, but instead adjusts, reflects, and withholds. It is a kind of language, one composed not of words but of presence, absence, timing, and tone. A glance that lingers too long or not long enough. A compliment that arrives unexpectedly or is suddenly withheld. An embrace offered, then subtly rescinded. None of it asks for explanation, yet all of it speaks. What confuses many men is not the behavior itself, but the instinct behind it. Conditioned to recognize power in volume and assertion, many overlook the influence that emerges through restraint. A woman may not challenge with words, but her energy shift can destabilize a man. More than any shouted insult, emotional withdrawal, when strategically employed, can evoke more introspection than direct criticism ever could. And when she praises sparingly and deliberately, it can feel like approval earned rather than affection. Given that calculated scarcity intensifies desire, this behavior is not born from malice but from instinct. In a world that often penalized female boldness, subtlety became a weapon of choice. A woman learns early that what cannot be changed through direct force can often be shaped through emotional momentum. The danger, however, lies in misunderstanding this language. When a man interprets her retreat as indifference or her gentleness as vulnerability, he misses the core truth. Influence does not need to be loud to be real. What she knows, perhaps without even naming it, is that withholding creates weight, a pause in conversation, an unanswered message, a delayed reaction. These small deferrals can shift the emotional balance more effectively than confrontation. And when a man is unaware of this quiet dynamic, he may find himself responding without understanding why. He becomes reactive, not to what is said, but to what is implied. And in that confusion, control quietly changes hands. Understanding this doesn't mean mistrusting women, it means respecting the depth of their emotional intelligence. It means acknowledging that female behavior often functions on frequencies that were never explained to men. And most importantly, it means recognizing that influence and control are not always exercised through dominance. Sometimes they are held within softness, and within that softness there is structure, there is memory, there is instinct. And instinct, unlike strategy, cannot be unlearned. It lives in her bloodline, not her conscious plan. Music? Conclusion. When love is no longer a performance, what we've uncovered in this video isn't meant to condemn or criticize. It's meant to bring clarity to a truth that far too many men overlook in silence for generations. Men have been guided by comforting illusions, taught to believe that love is always innocent, always redemptive, always pure, but clinging to those illusions often leads to disillusionment, heartbreak, and a gradual loss of self. It isn't that women are deceptive by nature, it's that their emotional strategies are deeply woven into the fabric of human behavior, shaped by instinct, protection, and survival. To truly understand love, men must move beyond the desire to be completed and instead begin the difficult but empowering process of seeing clearly, of recognizing that not all affection is unconditional, that not all softness is vulnerability, and that sometimes what appears to be love is simply a performance tailored to meet hidden needs. This awareness isn't about blame, it's about growing into emotional responsibility. Because when a man knows himself, honors his boundaries, and sees a woman not as a savior, but as a separate, complex human being, he breaks free from the emotional scripts that have kept him stuck. The truth is not always easy to accept, But without it, no real connection can grow. Love must be more than longing and idealization. It must be rooted in clarity, self-respect, and mutual understanding. Only then does love stop being a stage for unspoken expectations and become a space where two people meet without masks, without roles, just as they are. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. Let this be a space where truth is spoken without fear and where real conversations can begin. And if you found value in what was shared today, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. There's much more ahead, and together we can keep uncovering the truths that deserve to be heard.